All right, so it's 12:04. So how about we get started? Can everybody hear me okay, first of all? I'm about to put everybody on listen only mode. Um, Here, I'm going to type it. Okay, so I have just put everybody on mute um, so that the feedback or anything does not interrupt the process. And I was having some sound issues earlier as I was preparing for the webinar. So I hope that everybody can now hear me okay. My computer is telling me that the microphone is working, but of course, I would love it if you guys were to provide some feedback as well. Um, I just put a little message in the chat window that says, can you hear me okay? So if you guys cannot hear me or whatever, just give me a little quick response so I know that, thank you. All right, good. I'm super glad that the microphone works. I don't know what it is about me. I feel like the first thing I do when we get on these calls is apologize um, for the technical difficulties, but I seem to always have them. Computers are absolutely not my thing. But today's an especially hectic day because da, 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 I am on my way to London, England. In fact, when we're done with this call, I'm going to close my computer, throw it in my book bag, and I've got some family here. I usually do these calls from my office, and today I'm doing it from my house. I've got some family here that are going to take me to the airport. So literally, I'm going to pack up my computer and jump in the car and go straight to the airport. My flight leaves in just a couple of hours. Um, so this will be the last thing that I do before I head out. And I'm really, really excited. I know that there are a couple of people on this call from the UK, and I don't know how far away you are from London, but uh, maybe you can make your way over to London on Thursday and Friday. Well, I will be doing my 2-day workshop. Marlon, Maria is not far at all. Well, if you know, you know what? I will put something in the chat window right now. So if anybody wants to sign up to the 2-day workshop that I'll be doing, it would be absolutely awesome to meet some people that I've been interacting with through this nice digital age here. And if not, no worries. I mean, I won't be mad at you or have my sensitive feelings hurt or anything. But it really would be nice. I've gone out there every year for the past few years and studied with an organization called Brief with Chris Iveson, Harvey Ratner, and Evan George. Um, Three of my absolute favorite people, and I consider them extremely close mentors. Here, I'm going to put the link to where I'm going to be in the chat window. Hopefully that works. It looks like it's kind of weird, but I'll try to post it again. Seems to be the only way I can safely just copy and paste that and put it in your search in your what's the word there? Put it in your where you put your websites, the www dot whatever. And it'd be great if I could meet you guys. So Maria, it sounds like you're not that far away, so that would be great. Like I was saying, I go out there every year and study with the three guys that run that organization, and I consider them close friends and mentors. And I'll be going out there today to stay with them and study with them, and then I think I'm going to teach with Harvey Tuesday morning, and spend the day with Chris on Wednesday. Thursday and Friday I do my teaching, and then Saturday and Sunday I'm actually going to try to mix in a little bit of vacation. And for those of you that know me, that's kind of unusual. So I'm going to have a whole free weekend to do nothing but take walks. And I'm originally from Boston, Massachusetts, so one of my favorite things to do on the planet Earth is to take walks. I just absolutely love them. And London, England is especially a special place for me to take walks because it's so historic and such a beautiful city to take walks. And ironically, being a kid from New England, being from the Boston area, I absolutely love the British weather. So that's what's going on in my world. So I hope you guys are all happy and busy and having the type of lives that you aspire to have, and being kind of happy folks. So I wanted to talk today about a topic that I think is especially integral yet tricky when you're using the solution focused approach um, with couples. And I gave a lot of thought to this, and I thought, man, what would be a good topic to discuss on our webinar? And I really hope you guys are finding this valuable. And, um, as I say many, many times, one of the things that led me to write about and teach about and do things like this is couples therapy is so challenging and so difficult that when I first got started, I didn't feel like I had the resources to be successful. I didn't have enough avenues I could turn to for learning. So I wanted to provide that. I wanted to see if I could do something about that. I wanted to be helpful. So I hope you guys are finding this helpful. But in the past week or two, I've had several issues with couples I've been working with in my office that I thought would be relevant to what we discuss here, and hopefully people could uh, learn from it and take from some of the things that I've been experiencing in my practice, as I think it's an important part of solution focused therapy, and that is the idea of exceptions. Now, as we know, exceptions have been a mainstay in the solution focused approach for decades and decades, and it's basically identifying times when the client does something other than the problem, because that's the potential towards some form of success. So when the client does something unusual rather than follow a problem pattern, in solution focused therapy, we call that an exception. Well, early on in my career, when I first started doing this work with couples, I noticed that exception finding with couples was very different than exception finding with individuals. Exception finding with couples was kind of tricky in a way. Like, for example, this was probably the worst session I ever did, and I'm almost embarrassed I'm about to tell you guys about it. But in my very early stages of my career, I was seeing a couple, and I'm sharing all this because I hope it can be helpful to you, and I want to talk about the way that I use exceptions now, and hopefully it will add to you guys your abilities to practice with couples. But in the early stages of my career, I had a couple came to my office, and we were having a conversation. Just sometimes as couples therapy can be, the topic was sensitive in nature, very very difficult for the couple to experience. The conversation was very very emotional, and about 15 minutes, well, maybe 15 to 20 minutes before our time would have been up, a very very clear exception came up related to the wife, uh, the wife in the couples. A very, very clear exception. The type of thing that if you were working with her as an individual, it would have been clearly something that we would have explored and tried to amplify it in our work together. But in this particular case, a very, very obvious exception came up, and I thought, as a clinician, well, this would be a great thing to explore. So I asked her further details about this particular exception. And the husband got very, very irritated because to him, the presence of that exception was somewhat part and parcel to the problem. So the fact that I was asking about this particular exception was irritating and taking away from this husband's ability to experience our conversation as helpful. And to be honest, to this very, very day, I feel terrible about that conversation, and it led to me really giving some thought about the way exceptions can be different with couples, because I don't want people to come to my office and experience difficulty because I wasn't handling the language content properly. I really want people to experience helpfulness, and I think that it's actually possible. I think that if we stick to a few rules, it's really, really possible, and utilizing exceptions can be powerful. Now, if I fast forward to this past week or two, I've had two couples where an exception came out, and I was able to explore that exception while utilizing the couple's dynamic. And in both examples, the person with whom possessed the exception, which I'll tell you guys a little bit about, but the person who possessed the exception later contacted me to thank me for being able to talk about that stuff. And in one particular case, one of the people had been in therapy for many, many years, and this issue has come up several times and caused her great distress. And she was so pleased that she could bring this issue up in therapy in front of her husband, and according to the email, it completely has changed their marriage. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how these things transpired, and I'm going to use these two couples that I saw in the past couple weeks as examples. So first, I want to give you 4 criteria for a good exception when working with couples, or a good way to utilize exceptions when working with couples. And the first thing, it must be focused on something meaningful to the relationship or the parties within the relationship. And here's what I mean. So the first couple that got me thinking about exceptions the past couple of weeks was a man and woman. I'll call them Tom and Jane. Now, Jane had an alcoholic parent, and this parent had been very difficult for Jane to manage and deal with as she was growing up. And kind of the typical things you experience when one of your parents is heavily involved in alcohol, abuse, neglect. She had younger siblings, and at a very young age, she was kind of charged with taking care of these younger siblings. It was very, very difficult for her. And according to the husband, for many years, I learned this later via email, the husband has always believed that those issues are what was causing his relationship with her, the problems currently. Like he was saying that when we fight, it's almost like she takes it out on me. So as we start talking, and I'm asking my typical questions, how did you guys meet and all these things, um, she talked about having a very, very difficult childhood. Now, I learned as we were talking that the husband was interested in this. Thus, it was meaningful to him that this get addressed and repaired. So I was able to ask her, how did she survive her childhood? Like, what skills does she possess that allowed her to survive her childhood? And then we could use language to provide the husband with a bit of a compliment. And not only did you survive your childhood, I was able to ask her, but how did you survive your childhood and come into adulthood with the ability to choose a man who cared about you so much? Now, I wish I'd been able to come up with questions like that back in the early stage of my career instead of, kind of fumbling through language. But in this particular case, the husband was invested because he knew addressing this would be beneficial to him. And the wife was invested because instead of asking her how bad was her childhood, I asked her what skills she utilized to get through it. And not just get through it, but get through it in a way that turned her into the type of adult that would make a very proper decision on who she would be in a relationship with. Well, all kinds of wonderful details began to come out. And literally, in the session, I could watch the couple viscerally move closer together. Like they began holding hands and talking in a way that I just hadn't seen them do prior. So about 4 or 5 days later, I get this wonderful email from this woman explaining that she has tried to talk about this issue for years in therapy, and the issue was much worse than I was aware of. The experiences that she had gotten in childhood, by the way. But now, because of the way that we went through it as solution-focused practitioners, she felt like she wouldn't have to deal with it in that way anymore, and her relationship, quote unquote, was perfect since our last session. And again, it just got me thinking about exceptions and how bringing up exceptions can be very, very helpful if we do it in a way that's amplifying towards the relationship and not just the individual. Like if we stick to these very, core tenets of exception finding and amplification, it can make a big deal. So that's number 1. Must be focused on something meaningful to the relationship or the parties within the relationship. The next thing is it must highlight a skill or characteristic that can be used within the relationship. So the second couple that got me thinking about these things, it was another example where this girl in the couple, she had a very, very, very difficult childhood, even worse than the previous person, to be honest. And I asked her a similar question. What skills did you utilize to get through? And I asked this very early in the session because I was made aware very early that she had a tough childhood, and her husband also was believing that this tough childhood was interfering in his ability to have a successful relationship with her on this date or in the current times. So I asked her, what skills did you use to get through your childhood? Like, what skills did you possess that caused you to get through it? And while the husband was present, we had kind of a detailed conversation, lasted maybe 10 minutes, about what skills she used to get through her childhood and how she knew she still had them. So then I turned to the husband and I asked him what skills he had to attract a woman like this, and he was able to come up with a list of skills. Now, the brilliant thing, the wonderful thing about this conversation and this particular couple is they allowed me to have this conversation with them, like a very vulnerable conversation about these skills they used in these sensitive parts of their lives. The woman being how she got through this difficult childhood where there was abuse, neglect, and abandonment, and she had to go live with an aunt and uncle at the age of 12 and ran away several times. And it was just a very difficult childhood. And it caused her to kind of look at her childhood in a very, very different way. What was magical is now I had a lot more data to utilize in my future focus questions, my miracle question essentially. So instead of just, some mysterious miracle happened, I was able to ask this couple, imagine you went to sleep tonight and those skills that you guys had that made your relationship, that made that caused you to survive and get through difficult times, and I had a nice list of them so I could list them all off, were now more present and being utilized towards the relationship. How would you know it? And they were able to we spent the rest of the session just eliciting details from this particular miracle, right? From this particular content data set, which was pretty remarkable. I mean, I literally just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And actually, it was that particular couple that made me think, you know what, I want to talk to the guys on the webinar about this. So that's number 2. It must highlight a skill or characteristic that can be used in the relationship. And that, I can't stress that enough, because there have been times where a husband or a wife thought that as someone got better, they would choose to be in the relationship less, or they'd be more likely to choose to end the relationship. And I cannot tell you, for the past 5 years, I've been seeing 20 to 25 couples a week, and I cannot tell you how many people come to my office. Sometimes it's the man in the relationship, and sometimes it's the woman in the relationship. But how many people come into my office, and the first thing they say is how afraid they were to come to couples therapy or let their partner come to therapy, because they thought the therapist would talk them out of being in this relationship. And this, to me, is the beautiful thing about solution-focused therapy, because it is not my job to determine whether or not this particular couple is in a healthy relationship or not. My job, I mean, sometimes safety becomes an issue, but my job is not to determine whether or not person A is good for person B or vice versa. My job is to help these people create the relationship that they would like to be a part of, and recognize that they must have already done some semblance of that before they even got to me. And couples are so appreciative of the fact that I'm not judging their relationship, and I'm not trying to talk them into anything, and I'm certainly not trying to talk them out of anything. But I cannot tell you how many times someone in the office has expressed to me that they had fear about coming to the session or allowing their partner to come to the session, for fear that I was going to talk them out of being in the relationship with them. And there have been times when someone would come to me individually just to make sure that I was not going to do that, and would reference back to previous therapist encounters where the therapist did do that. And I just don't think that's our place. And again, it's one of the things that I find so beautiful about the solution-focused approach, is I'm not terribly interested in making those determinations for couples. Okay, so on to number 3 is the exception must work for the other party. So, for example, and it's kind of what I was getting at before when I said, we're not going to really talk them out of or encourage them not to be in a relationship. But if you got better at skill A, then that would also work for the person in the relationship. So if the husband, let's say, one of the exceptions we noticed was something related to that person being independent, let's say. So if you got better at being independent and utilizing your independence within the relationship, somehow that would have an impact that was positive on your, in this case, wife, or vice versa. But the skills and amplification that we do have to drive towards the relationship and not away from it. Now, I was once talking to a group in Las Vegas, I think, and someone asked me, what if the couple shouldn't be together? Well, first, I had to explain that I really don't make that determination, and I very much view that as none of my business. And secondly, if I were to do that and I'm not doing the job that the couple has asked me to do, they're just going to terminate therapy and go see somebody else that will. So it's in our best interest to have conversations with people that elicit these strengths and make sure that the strengths work for both parties in the relationship. When you're a couples therapist, you have to work for the relationship, especially when it fits with the couple's best hopes. If I say, what are your best hopes from this therapy? And they tell me something that is towards the relationship, then my remit subsequent to that is to say things and ask questions that benefit the entire relationship and move them closer together and not further apart. So the exceptions must work for the other party in the relationship if I'm highlighting an exception about the other. Going back to the two examples I said about that occurred in the past couple of weeks in my office, if I had asked her, like, what are your best, I'm sorry, how did you get through your childhood? If she had said, well, I just stopped talking to my mom, well, obviously, I'm not going to say, well, then let's stop talking to your husband. We have to utilize strengths and skills that are applicable within the relationship and benefit both parties. I'm not just working for one person, I'm working for the relationship as a whole. Um, and then lastly, oh, by the way, and one of my favorite questions towards that end is very often things happen in relationships that change the dynamic of the relationship. And probably most prominently is when people have children. And very, very frequently, people will say things to me like, we haven't done that or behaved in that way since before the child was born. So asking people what their child would notice as they started using these skills within the relationship to show them what the relationship looked like that led to their creation, you get much, much, much more richer, detailed conversations about the preferred future. But when you're working with couples, it has to start from a conjoint place. Now, as I started off by saying, I'm on my way to England, and I just to be able to tell you I'm excited is an understatement. I absolutely love going out there to learn and teach and spend time with Chris Iveson, Harvey Ratner, and Evan George. But Chris Iveson in particular, I remember the first time he and I sat down to talk about couples back in 2009, he would say that he would ask almost two different miracles. So he'd ask person A a series of future focused questions, and then ask person B a series of future focused questions. But actually, I think that we're better served to help them co-construct the same miracle, and that ensures that we're developing exceptional stories that are working towards the relationship and not apart from it. If I ask separated questions, then I might accidentally bring in data that's going to drive them apart. So it's very, very important that we work on a conjoint miracle, that we're co-constructing one particular story. And then the fourth and final thing in relation to exceptions is it must be noticeable. So it must be something that the wife can see happening and the husband can see happening, or as I just alluded to, the children can see happening. But it's not enough just to kind of talk about it in vagaries. We have to talk about it in as much specificity as possible so that it's a noticeable thing. With this particular couple, it wasn't enough just to talk about the skills that she had that helped her get through her childhood. It also wasn't enough just to talk about what that would look like in the relationship. We have to ask them how you would notice your partner doing this and what you think your partner would notice to see you doing this. So it's observable. So it's not just, I'm going to watch you being more independent. It's, I'm going to watch you being more independent via these particular signs of noticeability. One of the things that I find so shocking about human beings is how often we are able to delete talent and accept flaws. So, for example, if I ask people, um, like on the bad parenting day, how come you're a bad parent today? They're going to accept that flaw and they're going to say something like, well, I was irritable today, I had a tough day at work, or, blah, 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 something related to that. But on a brilliant parenting day or with brilliant parent decisions, when I ask people how come they were able to make such brilliant parenting decisions, they don't accept that compliment and they don't attach it to a talent. They typically say things like, well, it's my kid, what else was I supposed to do? But the simple truth is they're utilizing a strength. And if we kind of train people to notice the utilization of these strengths, then they simply utilize them more and with a very, very profound impact. So that's the final thing: is it must be noticeable both to themselves and to the other party in the relationship. So um, that's my spiel for today. And how are we doing on time? So we got about 30 minutes, and I would love to take some questions or comments and see how you guys are doing. So I have you on listen only mode. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to put you on question and answer mode. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, this is the easiest way to do it, is if you have a question or comment, raise your hand. I try to, on these calls, I try to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes and then allow the remainder of the time for question and comment so we can have a bit of a discussion, because I don't really know how to do this and if we're not having a discussion. So if you have a question or comment, raise your hand and I will highlight you and unmute you. Or you can be really nice and not ask any questions and let me go to the airport. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. I've got plenty of time. This is actually the thing I'd like to do most. Okay, so Lynn Bush from Fort Worth has a question. Trying to figure out how to unmute you, Lynn. Muted because it. Oh, Lynn, it says something about click to disable their ability. Let me see. There's something with your computer, Lynn, that's not allowing you to be unmuted. But I'm trying. Can you type your question, Lynn? Would that be okay? It says you have something with your Flash. You're not allowing Flash permissions. Okay, so Lynn, I see your hand is up. Would it okay if I ask you to type your question or comment? Lynn, you can try pressing *6, and that might work. But if not, I'm happy to read your response in the chat window there. In the meantime, does anybody else have any questions or comments as we wait for Lynn? And I'm so sorry, but of course, like I said before, there's always going to be some sort of technical issue while I'm around. So Dawn, judging from your response in the chat window earlier, does that mean you're? Oh yeah, it says you're in London. So have you seen the link for me being in at Brief on Thursday and Friday? All right, we had another hand go up, and I will unmute them. Okay, Carol, you are unmuted.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment, I guess, about what not to do. I'm seeing a couple, and also seeing one of them individually, and the husband came in and said that his wife had complained that he was monopolizing the conversation too much, and that I needed to be able to cut him off so that she had equal time. So I brought that up in the couple session and really thanked her for pointing that out, and definitely made a a much better effort to keep it, more balanced.
Oh, good. It's interesting that you say that. I'm currently participating in a microanalysis study with Janet Bavalis, Sarah Smock, and Adam Frower, and they took one of my sessions, one of my videotape sessions, and they analyzed it where they're basically looking at it utterance by utterance. Now, an utterance is just a turn. So anytime somebody in the conversation takes a turn, whether it's me or the members of the couple. And the funny thing is, because I talk very much about, you have to take turns in the therapy. So they get a turn, then I get a turn, then they get a turn, then I get a turn. So we've transcribed and counted up to about 30 minutes. And at minute 30, the wife in the session has spoken 69 times, and the husband in the session has spoken 67 times. And I,
Pretty good.
and I think if you kind of train yourself to elicit a response from each partner, then the conversation truly becomes co-constructed, and it allows for the session to move in a direction that is okay by both parties. But it takes practice. I mean, it really, really, really takes a lot of practice. It's something that it's unusual, but it's something that we have to kind of learn how to do as couples therapists, especially solution-focused couples therapists, because this is such a language-based model. It's such a question-based model that we've got to elicit responses from both people in the session. Now, sometimes a response might be longer than another. You can probably tell from listening to me on these calls, I'm very wordy. So if someone were to do couples therapy with me and my wife, I'm very wordy in that my wife isn't. So my turn might take longer than my wife's turn, but as long as each person takes a turn, then the conversation is truly co-constructed, and we run into that situation less, where someone has said that someone took over the session. In fact, one of the things I'm most proud of about this work is I can't remember a single time anybody has told me they felt like I've sided, excuse me, they felt like I sided with the other. Now, some people experienced me as helpful, and some people didn't, and some people moved on, and some people stayed, but I can't remember one time where somebody told me they thought I was siding with the other based upon how much attention I was paying to the other person's responses. So I'm going to mute Carol, and then Lynn was able to type her question. I'm sorry for the issues, Lynn, that we weren't able to unmute you, but I'll read the question out loud and then do my best to answer it. I'm seeing someone who was referred from another therapist. The woman is still in therapy with the other therapist, and the other therapist is focusing on all the negative things that have ever happened. It seems like I'm constantly having to bring back to the positive for the couple. Wow. Okay. That happens. I've experienced that very, very frequently. Um, there have been times when it's been such a prevalent issue that I've actually invited the couple to take a hiatus from the other therapist until we finished our work, which is usually just a matter of weeks. Um, but I think we live in a very negative world, and one of the reasons SFT has become so popular in the past few years is because this field is a very negative field. It's all about identifying and what's wrong and problem-solving modalities, and people think they're doing their best work by investigating problems. I've watched therapy tapes of students and skilled professionals who truly believe that if the client was crying and experienced pain in the session, that's evidence of deep process work and thus effective therapy. We just come from a very different place. So uh, I try not to let my brain, and you're not saying this, Lynn, at all, but I'm just saying, like, I try not to let my brain judge the other therapist. I just try to do the best job I can. And if I feel like that it is getting in the way of me being an effective therapist, me being an effective couples therapist in particular, I absolutely will invite them to take a hiatus from seeing the other therapist, just to increase effectiveness of my work with the couple. Because you're right, it's really, really difficult if the other therapist is bringing up all of the negative content and I'm asking them about the better halves of themselves. To be honest, what usually happens is the more I do that, the more they don't want to go back to the negative world. Most people, and sometimes this is not true, I suppose, but most people truly enjoy answering these types of questions more than they do answering those types of questions. So in my experience, when I stick with it long enough, they just do it. I'm working with a couple now where, for no other reason than they wanted to come to a person that specializes in couples, but the man in the relationship currently sees an individual therapist. Well, he recently set up an appointment with me because answering the questions with the couple was such an enjoyable process. He set up an individual session and he simply said, "Would you ask me those same questions?" So, of course, gladly I agreed to, and he is going to see me for therapy and continue to ask me those questions. So, it's a very tricky process, but stick with it. And if you feel like it's getting in the way, then certainly invite the person that's in the therapy with the difficult person to take a hiatus, which I have done before, and usually they do. Okay, so any other questions? Carol, I see your hand is up. I'm new to using SFT. Somebody named Lynn has asked the question saying, I'm new to SFT with couples. Can you recommend a good introductory book? Yes. Um, the um, the first book that I would say, if you're new to working with couples, or if you're new to SFT, I would actually invite you to read lots and lots of things about SFT. Now, there are lots of great books about SFT. Some of my favorites are Alistair McDonald wrote a book called Solution Focused Therapy, Theory, Research, and Practice. There's a book called More Than Miracles, um, Tales of Solutions. I've written two. My first one, I really recommend, and you know what? This is not an endorsement of my book. I edited a book where I was really interested in the way people learn solution focused therapy because it's so different than the other ways of practicing therapy. So, me and my mentor and one of my dearest friends, Dr. Linda Metcalf, interviewed 15 therapists from around the world that utilize this approach. And we interviewed really the top people: Harry Corman and Yvonne Dolan and uh, Raya Gould and Allison Johnson, and I mean some really wonderful clinicians. Brian Cade, like I don't want to list them all, but and we asked them how they learned this approach and what was the thing about this theory, this therapy that led them to wanting to learn it. So for people new to the approach, because the center of that particular book that I edited is learning, I recommend that book. Now, about working with couples, you really, I would recommend reading Michelle Weiner Davis's book, Divorce Busting, that was written in the mid 90s, I believe. And then, and there aren't a whole lot of books on SFT with couples, but I wrote a book that came out last year called Solution Building in Couples Therapy. And both books are available, but from my research, those are really the only two. You know what? That's not true. A book came out about a month ago written by Matthew Seligman and Mark Babach, and I apologize, I can't remember the title, but that one is about solution-focused therapy with families, and then a component of that book is for couples. Um, Let me see. I'll try to think some others. But those are probably the places where I would start. But from my research, those are the only three books that have an a target or a slant towards couples. Wonderful book. The second book Elliot mentioned. You mean my book? No, I'm only kidding. I should probably stop joking. It's weird because I can't really see anybody's faces, so I could be being horribly offensive. Um, and I don't want to come off as somebody who's like pushing their own books or anything like that, but um, the book that I just wrote, it's from a very very passionate place. Uh, it's a book that I wrote from my very very heart, and it's been pretty well received. I'm really really happy about it. But there's just not a whole lot of materials on that look like related to couples. There's just not. See, this is so cool. Like so many people on the call are actually sending me compliments about my book. Thank you guys. Um, but there really isn't, and I think that even as therapists, we're all smart. I mean, we all have degrees and licensure and all this stuff. We're all intelligent people. But I started noticing when I got in the field and I started reading books about therapy, I was reading books like they were about the theory of therapy and less so the practice of therapy. So I really started looking to find books that were about the practice of therapy, not just what questions to ask, but like how to ask them and when and how people respond, like the actual practice of the conversation that takes place in therapy. Regardless what approach of therapy you practice, therapy is nothing more than a conversation. It's a conversation between two people, or in this case, three people, where one person has a decided goal and the other person's job is to help them reach that goal. But at its fundamental core, it's just a conversation. And I think sometimes we forget that. And as I was reading all these books about psychotherapy, very few of them were about the actual practice of therapy. So I wanted to write books about that. I wanted to write books that were about the actual practice of therapy. So in my book, I transcribed a session, and you get the whole session in the book, and I walk you through the way the language is used in the actual session. Michelle Weiner Davis's book is pretty good as well about that sort of stuff. More Than Miracles is absolutely great and brilliant in sticking to the practice of therapy, and so is Alistair McDonald's book, Theory, Research, and Practice. Like I'm just such a nerd about that sort of thing. I was so desirous of being the best therapist that I could that I really wanted to read things that would help me apply the knowledge to the therapy. Like I didn't want to just be more knowledgeable about therapy. I wanted to be more skilled in how to do it. So those are the books that I would probably recommend that kind of focus on that. And my training institute, the Connie Institute, that's really all our focus is. Like we want people to be able to attend trainings and be able to apply what they learn in their work with couples immediately. Like no hesitation, no nothing. And it's been an absolute joy. Like I'm so happy and excited and all of those things because I don't think couples therapy is as challenging as we make it out to be. And in fact, no matter where I go in the world, people tell me I don't like working with couples. Working with couples is so hard and so challenging. Well, I can understand when people say that, but I just don't agree. I think couples therapy can be just as um, simple, I guess, would be the word I can use with it as it is with individuals. You just have to stick to a couple of core beliefs and tenets in order to be effective. And it works. I mean, it absolutely works. Not surprising at all that the field of marriage and family therapy was founded by a bunch of communication experts because that's really what we have to do to be able to be effective with couples. Okay, so any other questions or comments? Thank you guys for those really good questions and comments, by the way. Well, I guess that will be all for today. I'm going to pack up and start heading out and begin my very long trek out to the UK. And hopefully, some of you guys that are from the UK that were on the call, I'll get to meet you. And for those of you that are interested in signing up, please help me spread the word and let people know that this will take place the first Monday at noon Central Standard Time US every month. And our conference, we're doing the Solution Building Couples Therapy Conference in Fort Worth, Texas in August. You can find that at my website, which is www.theconnieinstitute.com. Excuse me, for those of you that are interested in coming to a 2-day conference that's totally focused on using this approach with couples, and we've got some great presenters, and Adam Frower and Sarah Smock are going to be the keynotes. I'm going to do one of the plenaries as well, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So hopefully you guys will be able to participate in that, and hopefully I'll get to see most of you or all of you on the call next month. So for the meantime, I'm going to sign off and begin my very, very long trip. And did I say very, very long trip? And over to the UK and spend 8.5 hours sitting on a plane. But it's okay. It's worth it because I think the UK is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And I can't think of anything to do. I can't think of anything I'd rather do than take walks around London, England. So, thank you guys all, and I look forward to seeing you next month. And hope you guys have a great, wonderful July. Stay safe in America. Here, it's our Independence Day. July 4th is coming up this weekend, so you guys all stay safe and enjoy. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.